Welcome to Community Spotlight, where we speak with local people who are making a difference in our community. Returning with me today is my guest, Mr. Terrance Hunter. He is the president and founder of the nonprofit Empowering the Fatherless. Their mission is to embrace, support, and empower fatherless children. In 1985, Terrance was convicted of second-degree murder and served 30 years in prison. While incarcerated, he utilized various programs that were offered, and he became a better person because of it. One of those programs was the Alternative to Violence Project. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us again. So tell me about this project, Alternative to Violence, that better known as Aavp, that you took part in while you were in prison.
Yes. When I decided to embark upon a journey of self-improvement, the very first group that I enrolled in was Aavp. And Aavp is a 3-day workshop in which the participants participate for 21 hours. And in this workshop, we are introduced to the concept of conflict resolution. In other words, we learn skills that enable us to diffuse potentially volatile situations in nonviolent manners. And you generally have 20 people in the workshop, and it's racially balanced. There's 4 Hispanics, there's 4 Asians, there's 4 Caucasians, and there's 4 African Americans in the group. And it's the very first time that most prisoners have a up close and personal encounter with people of different races, because prison is a very segregated environment. So when we go into the workshop, we have to interact with each other, and it's really an interesting experience.
So what do these workshops entail exactly? I know you, instead of talking about violence and violent behavior, what do you do or talk about instead?
Well, what happens when we first enter the workshop, as a facilitator, it's my job to create a safe place where people will feel comfortable talking about things that they normally wouldn't. So we advise the participants what we're trying to do is build a sense of community. And then I let them know we have a confidentiality clause where whatever's said in the room stays in the room. So once we set that atmosphere, people are pretty ready to get involved. And like you said earlier, we don't spend a lot of time talking about violence. Instead, what we do is we participate in exercises and games that promotes social skills, as opposed to our antisocial skills that we enter the prison system with. So it's an experiential workshop. And the exercises are created in a clever way to where it causes us to interact with each other in an up close and personal manner, which most of us aren't accustomed to doing, especially when you look at men. So it's a very good experience for men who are willing and want to change, and it creates an environment where that more or less promotes.
Now, isn't one of those exercises called concentric circles? Explain what that is.
Concentric circles is one of the main exercises we use in Aavp, and what we do, we have an inner circle of men, and then we have an outer circle. And as a facilitator, I will throw something out there for them to respond to. For example, I might say, think of a time in your life where you did something you were ashamed of or something you were proud of. And I'll tell the outer circle will begin with you, and that person will have 2 minutes to tell the person on the inner circle a time when they did something they were proud of or a time they did something they were ashamed of. And at that moment, you have to look the person in the face, you look them in their eyes.
So directly.
Exactly, and talk for 2 minutes. And then after they've spoken for 2 minutes, then I'll tell the inner circle to answer the same question that I threw out there. And then that person talks for 2 minutes and the other person has to listen. So this is an exercise that not only forces you to engage with a person in a very intimate way, but it also is an exercise in listening, because quite often, if you notice, when people have conversations, the person's speaking, and before they can get everything out, the next person is responding. So this is an exercise in being patient and listening. And after the exercise is over, you're probably going to encounter 4 or 5 people. And then when we process the exercise, we will ask individuals, can you tell us what the first person you spoke to said, and so on. So we always have a processing aspect of every exercise. When it's over, we come back into the full circle, and then we share the experience with the group as a whole.
And what's the typical feedback from the participants?
Well, it's interesting because some people are better listeners than others, and some have better memories than others. So it's common to have a person who can remember the conversation you had with all 4 or 5 people, and then there's others, they may just remember something one person said. But the key is you're getting people to talk and speak and interact in a way that they're normally not used to interacting. Because on the prison yard, we do nothing even remotely close to what takes place in an Aavp workshop.
Mm-hmm. Now, what impact has this project, how has it impacted the prison population, the general prison population?
Well, Aavp came to Soledad Central in 2006. And at that time, riots were a normal activity on the yard, racial riots generally. It was a very violent prison, and the warden wanted to bring Aavp there because he saw the results that Aavp had on other prison yards, which was a reduction in violence. And that's what happened at Central. All of a sudden, the prison level of violence went down because we were interacting and getting to know one another to where we just weren't looking at each other as someone of a different race. Because quite often when you conduct these exercises, I will find that Hispanic guys have backgrounds similar to mine, raised by their mother, don't know their dad, born in a poverty situation or whatever. And so I think when you talk to people in a very intimate way, then when we leave the workshop, it's hard for you to go back to the way you thought before you experienced this 21-hour workshop. And what happened is I would find myself talking to guys that normally we wouldn't talk to each other because we're of different races. And we'd meet each other on the yard. And what really happened that was amazing is that you could get a Hispanic guy that would have a problem with a black guy, and he would come to me and tell me about it, and then I would go talk to that guy and act as a mediator. So in actuality, I went from being an instigator to a mediator, where I was actually stopping incidents.
That's fabulous. I mean, that's pretty impressive. So I was going to ask, so the people that were taking this course, these workshops, how did that affect, after you were looking straight at someone in the eye and who was Latino, and you got to know this person, and you saw them on the yard. What was the impact with people of like your race or their race?
That's interesting because, as I said before, the workshops, it wasn't common for African Americans to mingle and interact with Hispanic guys. And then after the workshops were over, then there were guys who hadn't taken the program on the line, and they would see certain ones of us interacting that weren't interacting before, and they were like, what's this all about? And so we would tell the guys on the line, and then something else that happens at the end of every workshop is we give out an Aavp pin that we can pin onto our shirt or our jacket. And so now when we're out in the main line, we'll see a guy that maybe we don't know, but we see he has an Aavp pin on. So you say, oh, so you're an Aavper. And it starts conversation, and relationships were built. And to give you a perfect example of just how big of an impact Aavp had on the prison population, when I went into the prison, certain prisoners of certain races were my enemies. And then by the time I left prison, I had trained a lot of those prisoners to become Aavp facilitators. And so on my very last night, I had guys of all races telling me how much they were going to miss me. And they were glad that the pro board found me suitable, but they were going to miss my presence.
The Aavp community believes in the concept of transforming power. They believe there is a power for peace and good in everyone, which can transform conflicting situations into cooperative relationships. This transforming power will provides the guidelines that Aavp uses to accomplish this objective.
And something else I'd like to point out here is that Aavp doesn't just have prison workshops. Workshops take place in the community also.
I was going to ask you about that. Explain that, because that was my next question. So it's folks who are violent or have violent tendencies, and how's that working out? And where are they located?
Well, when I became an Aavp facilitator, people from the outside community would come inside the prison to learn Aavp guidelines under my leadership. So I've trained a lot of people from the outside community to be Aavp facilitators. And so what they do out there is they make an announcement in a certain area, and they'll ask people who would like to acquire, conflict resolution skills to sign up. And so they have those type of workshops going on in the community all the time. As a matter of fact, you have Aavp workshops taking place in Africa and Australia, all over the planet.
Wonderful.
And so we actually have an international Aavp community.
The Alternative to Violence Project has even made it to the Ukraine and provided workshops for youth and adults. These photos were taken in February of 2022.
So Aavp is impacting society as well as prison populations.
That's terrific. I mean, we need that more than ever in this world.
Yes.
So tell me, you are a team coordinator and have been since 1994. Briefly explain what you're doing now with that.
Okay, so when I was at San Quentin in 1994, I completed the Aavp Basic Workshop. And it was such a rewarding experience that I went ahead and completed the Aavp Advanced Workshop, and I completed the Training for Trainers Workshop, and that made me an Aavp Facilitator, which we later changed to the name Team Coordinator. And that basically means that you can actually lead a workshop. In other words, I select my co-facilitators. I make sure all the material that's needed to conduct a workshop is there. And basically, I'm just the person who makes sure that everything goes to plan. If there's something happens out of the ordinary, then I'll improvise and get us back on track. Since I've been out of prison, I've conducted several Aavp youth workshops in the city of Salinas where I was the team coordinator. And so it's really a gratifying thing because instead of just being a participant, you're actually involved in the leadership aspects of it, which gives you a different perspective. Also, I think it's more rewarding also.
Yes, I always find, and I almost call it selfish, I feel better when I'm giving back to the community because at the end of the day, it's like, oh, I feel better about myself and I did something good. Great. And one last thing, how does Aavp get their funding?
Aavp is a nonprofit organization, and they rely on funding from individuals and corporations in order to be able to provide these services because there's cost involved, and without donations from people who care about the community and people acquiring these type of skills, they would not be able to function.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Terrence. As always, it's a pleasure.
You
have such an incredible story. Now, please check out his book, My 30 Years with the California Department of Corrections. And to my audience, thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Community Spotlight. See you next time. Stay strong, South County.